Hey. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We're very glad to be here with you. I'm Tehuti, and
I'm Sundiatta.
we're here in an inaugural show here, Don't Talk Politics. And the question is, why wouldn't we?
Mm.
Given our circumstances globally, as well as nationally, and even locally. We're here in L.A. County, Inglewood, California, and there are a lot of issues that converge. And we just simply want to have real discussions about our people. We're unapologetically African centered, and we feel that that context needs to be presented when we have these type of discussions.
Right.
So, the nature of our program is going to be broad in terms of subject area. However, it's going to be consistent in terms of historical perspective in those areas. We'll have various guests. We will primarily deal with commentary, as well as call in, as well as opinion. But the goal is solution, and we're solution oriented, and we believe that through a proper discussion and a proper analysis, and ultimately organization around common ideas, that we can reach those solutions. So, Sundiatta, why don't you just briefly talk a little bit about some of our areas that we feel is important.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So what we want to do is we want to have a discussion filled with information historically, and because really the problem we see is that a lot of people talk politics and they don't really understand historically what they're talking about. So they come to false conclusions based upon a lack of really understanding the terrain. So we've been at this for years. He's went to Grambling, I went to Howard, and we were history majors and African Americans, political science majors and business majors. So we have a extensive understanding of these issues, and we want to bring the proper knowledge so that when you hear something like black on black crime or gentrification, or you hear all these things about our children not doing well in school, we come at it sometimes from an area of little understanding, almost elementary understanding.
Yeah.
So we want to give it a more sophisticated understanding so that you can then go to your family members and say, wait, hold on. That sounds good, but really I learned that this is why we're here. Like when you look at the fact that we're facing gentrification in terms of removal of black people off the lands that they've been on for the last 40, 50, 60, and 70 years. It's just not simply the fact that people are coming in with a better way of doing something. We're going to show you the undercurrent, how our communities were really warred upon silently. So what's on the table is different than what's underneath.
And one of the key terms that you just said was warred upon and war, because I don't think we view ourselves as under attack or in a actual war. And I think it's very important that we make that very clear, that we as an African people in America are the targets of warfare.
Yeah.
And I don't think people are sometimes just leery to discuss it in those terms, and it's based on the fear that has been programmed into us.
Right.
And it comes to us in various ways, and those are some of the areas that we're going to get to when we get into specific areas. But it's in our religion, it's in our spirituality, that the way that it's presented. It's in our power base, or the fear of consequences for when we speak independently. It's in the judicial system for sure. And the question is, are we transmitting that generationally to our youth? And I believe we are. We our interactions with law enforcement, the media, the propaganda
Right.
that surrounds that, I think it gives a culture of fear that we often do not face.
That's a good point. You mentioned propaganda, and we really want to delve deeply into that, because when you talk to someone and you ask them what they are thinking, what they're going to tell you is really their years of socialization, or their years of understanding that's based upon information placed in front of them. And so we want to really put in proper context the mentality that we currently face in our community, and how do we get to this mentality. Like, we really want to bring up names like Ed Barney, the propagandist, the advertiser who got women to smoke cigarettes. We know
In the 40s.
yeah,
That's
in the
right.
40s, when women weren't smoking cigarettes, and the advertising agency hired him to get people's, especially women's, attitude about smoking, so that they'll spend money on buying. With that same type of advertising and propaganda to get you to do something you wouldn't normally do, is also the same type of propaganda and advertising that will view yourself differently and have you acting differently than you normally would not act.
And especially us. There's a book that come to mind when you mentioned that, called Rape of the Mind, that Professor Grant used to talk about all the time. And basically it shows how the subtleties of how we're manipulated into a way of thinking. For instance, during the time that you're speaking, World War II, the enemy of America was the Japanese and the Germans.
That's right.
But a short time later, they weren't enemies anymore.
Yep, they were
As a matter of
allies.
fact, they were allies. They invited them over, and much of the medical profession's techniques are coming from those German scientists and doctors, allopathic medicine and surgery, and drug therapy. All of these things that we see, we don't have the history.
Now, I'm gonna give an example of how that ties into where we are as Black people. So sometimes we take history like it's in compartments, but actually they interact. So when they brought those German scientists and doctors over here after World War II, they created what is referred to H-1B visas. And the H-1B visa allows anyone with technical skills around the world to come to America and automatically get citizenship after a few years of working here, if they apply, or if they add something to the value of America's science, medicine, business, and so forth. Now, why is that important? Because at that point, when they realized that they could piggyback off of other people's education, then they were able to defund our education.
That's right.
And really rely on other groups of people to hire in those fields. So instead of having to pay thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars to educate a scientist, you could actually go to Japan or Germany or France and just cherry pick those and bring them here, and not actually hire people in this country. So what that did was that allowed them to take black children and really put them to the side, track them into lower based classes where they would not face STEM classes and so forth, and just go get their teachers. So that's one example of how you look at one thing and you can really trace it, how it had an impact on black people. And that's the kind of things that we'll be talking about. We just won't be talking about politics as normal, as usual.
And so, if you're interested in some of this, you have a question or a comment you would like to make, our call-in number is 424-390-6993. Once again, 424-390-6993, and feel free to call at any time. But what's interesting is our topic today is where are we and how did we get here? And I think the reason why, one of the foundations of why we're so easily fooled, I'll say, is our lack of appreciation for the study of history and how the lessons that history teaches, so that we don't repeat and don't continue to start over and over again with the same type of mistakes. And I think, foundationally, we have to remember why the majority of us were brought here, and we were brought here to make white people wealthy, and that's a reality. That was our reason for being, quote unquote, imported from the African continent or throughout the other Caribbean to come to this country, was to make them wealthy. And our question is how has that dynamic changed? Regardless if we're making millions or even billions in some case as entertainers or athletes or business people, ultimately, what are we producing? And it's fundamental that we produce something. As one of our scholars, Amos Wilson, said, you can't consume your way into equality. You can't consume your way to go beyond equality. Even you have to be a producer, because when you're a producer of a thing, you also are a producer of independent thinking. And right now, we're content to not have independent thinking. So what do you think about that?
Oh yeah, definitely. And that's one of the names that we'll be relying upon and referring to is Amos Wilson. He's wrote a number of books and just an extensive knowledge in terms of our conditions. So that's one of the names I want you to get familiar with, Amos Wilson. And like you're saying, that history is important because there was a book written in 1984 by George Orwell, and he said, he who controls the past controls the future, and he who controls the present controls the past. And many times, as history is taught in school, it's bland, and it's not really given the nuggets that you need to make decisions about future decisions. Why history is important is because if you have a view of yourself that is shaped by what you feel is long-lasting behavior, you're going to assume the future is going to be similar to that behavior. So if we can get you to understand, well, for instance, let's give it just a real brief, just America, how America was founded. I'm just going to briefly go into that. It's like, and we're going to get into this as we go on. But as America was founded by, they say, Christopher Columbus, but what spurred Christopher Columbus to leave the west coast of Africa, which he was sailing for 20 years, learning how to navigate through the stars in the sky, was the fact that Black African Moors were just kicked out of Spain.
That's right.
In 1492.
That's right.
And Queen Isabella said,
and King Ferdinand
say, hey, we just kicked out this wealth of money and talent and resources. Because remember, Europe at that time wasn't reading. When those Africans came into Europe and through Spain in 711, they introduced bathing, they introduced reading, right. They introduced fountains. And what's funny about that is some of the foods that you eat and you call Mexican or Spanish food is actually North African food.
That's right.
And why is this important? Because when you talk to our children, okay, let me back up. This is why it's important, because a Japanese child can look at a samurai,
that's right,
and have appreciation that samurai tradition goes back hundreds of years, and he automatically walks with a sense of a swag. Well, a Black child who's taught that you came from nothing but naked people, they don't have that same type of reinforcement when they sit in that classroom next to that Japanese child, not knowing that it was their people who started civilization. So I'm gonna go back to the Christopher Columbus real quick, and that is that Spain kicking out those Africans employed Columbus to go to the New World, and he was traveling up and down the coast of Africa, learning how to navigate. That's why we say he had a African, and he didn't trust himself, so he took an African and put him on board with him to help him get to the so-called New World, which wasn't so new after all. So that's why history is important. So if a child learns that in school, instead of just learning Christopher Columbus discovered America, and doesn't understand where he played in that. Matter of fact, that African child played a huge role in that. So once he understands that, then that child is going to behave differently in the classroom when it comes to mathematics, when it comes to science, when it comes to understanding himself, and he's going to walk with an academic type of swag.
And not only that, you know, they were dominated for 800 years by those Moors, and they founded the first university, the first, you know, the first perfumes, and they even had air conditioning the way that they're constructing. But I hear we have a phone call, so let's go to the caller. Yeah, caller, you there?
I'm sorry, speak up a little.
Let's go to the caller.
Go ahead. I'm sorry, we couldn't hear you.
Yeah, caller, you there? Yes, I am. How you doing? Speak up a little.
Hello.
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Go ahead. Go right ahead.
Yeah, we hear you loud and clear.
Yeah, I was listening to the conversation that y'all was talking about, and you know, true history, Black history, African history, is that, you know, Christopher Columbus didn't found or find America. You know that, right?
Of course,
absolutely.
That's what we said.
That's what we were saying.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Say what now?
Yeah, that's what we were saying.
That's exactly what we said. Yes. Go ahead. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's American white history, the history that they want us to believe.
Of course not. Yeah, we know that.
But you know, even when it comes down to conquering slaves in Africa, this is something that the history books don't tell us. That the Nigerians are the tribe that conquered and was one of the main tribes that conquered and sold Africans to the Spanish people. They had all kind of hold on, let me turn my speaker off.
Yeah, please do. Oh, by the way, there's a book you can get that talks extensively about how Christopher Columbus wasn't the first, and that is Ivan van Sertima. They came before Columbus.
Right.
As a matter of fact,
actually, I read that book in prison.
I know. Yeah,
I read that.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I read that book before.
Go ahead, brother. You were talking.
But I have you know, I read other books that, you know, saying that enlighten me on other history, you know, that's deeper than, you know, just talking about the white history that they tried to teach us and instill in us in America. Now, the true history of Africans and how do you say the situation that we're in right now as a whole, you know, and this is the conversation that, you know what I'm saying, that don't, you know, a lot of people try to stray from, you know, don't talk about how we was conquered by our own people and sold to the slave owners, or the people who had the ports built on outside of Africa.
Right.
And it's crazy because, you know, the people who was conquered and, you know, sold as slaves was actually used to be kings, queens, and, you know, they had, you know, smaller tribes, smaller kingdoms, but they was conquered by the lower, you know, it's kind of, it's a crazy mixed up history that we have amongst each other. But the history of ourselves is so dark and sinister that we don't even know about it. And even to the fact before, you know, we at once upon a time, we ran the world before the white man even knew, or how do you say, the Caucasian even knew how to walk and talk and stand on 2 feet.
Yes.
We was treating them as slaves. The ones who truly built the pyramids was the white people.
No, well,
you know, I mean, if we look at history and how it really, you know, how it really persists and how, you know, the broken parts of history that's not told. You know, a lot of the stories that, you know, implicated in the Bible are stories that was, you know, handpicked to be told for a certain purpose and a reason. And in America, you know, a lot of people use the Bible as a, you know, a directional living tool.
Right.
But and to a certain extent, it was written and created by a white man.
Right. Right.
And a group of white men that created that book
Right.
to not just say mislead us, but to make us believe that power lies within that book. And a lot of people right now are so psychologically stuck on the spiritual realm of it, and don't understand that it's not about that book.
Right.
Now, I'm not saying that we can't say that God didn't allow that book to be created.
Okay.
Because everything that man think of or think he have an intention.
I want to get your name down. I want to make sure I address you properly. What's your
name? My name is Brother David.
Okay, Brother David. Tehuti's got a little something to say real quickly, and then I'm going to chime in. And I got your point. We're gonna
you cover a lot of area, and we appreciate that, brother. As far as our people, part of what we're discussing are the context of sure they were conquered by each other. That was a natural occurrence in history where different groups had conflicts. But what was different was the impetus behind the Atlantic slave trade. A lot of those conquering groups were faced with being conquered by the European themselves, as well as
they was pirates. They was pirates themselves.
Right.
A lot of them came. That's how America was built. America was built on immigrants. A whole bunch of immigrants came over here. It wasn't even about how do you say how it was conquered, but how it was built. But when they started allowing people to come over or making America a place to move to, it was built off immigrants.
I want to say this. First off, you said Nigeria was the people who conquered. Well, actually, Nigeria wasn't wasn't an entity back when slave trade began. These are names that later we use to identify areas. The people in them or different what we call nations or tribes. But also we want to be careful. This is why history is so important, because when we start to look back, and we hear this a lot. I'm gonna give you the things that we hear about the slave trade, and we use it. They use they weaponize it to further harm us in the telling of the history. So when we always talk about people about who our identity, who are we in terms of our identity? We say, well, we can't be even if we're African. Those Africans sold us into slavery, and they did this and they did that, they did this, and because we aren't really, because we haven't done the proper analysis of the history, our understanding of the culture.
Some black people don't.
Brother David, let me just say this, Brother David, and then I'm gonna let you respond to it. So because we haven't done our proper analysis of the cultural patterns back then. For instance, let me give you an anecdotal, something that happened with me. I had a sister from Nigeria watching my father. She was an Igbo from Nigeria. And she said, we have slaves today. I was like, what? She said, yeah, my grandfather has a whole tract of land and we have slaves. I was like, wow, what's up with these slaves? I'm like, wow. She said, yeah, they married into my family. They have a huge tract of land and they call me auntie. And so I'm like, wait, that's not, we throw the term slave around and we don't understand that
it's not in the same context.
It's not in the same context. When Africans faced off against Africans, and many times it was nonviolent, you won't find the guillotines and all that gutting of people like you do in Europe's history when it comes to war. But many times when they faced off against each other, the loser would then
become the slave,
become the so-called captive of the conquering group. And how do you integrate that captive into the rest of society? Now, because
it's only one way that captive can be reintegrated into society.
No,
he must escape his. He's only one. He's got to escape his capture.
No, that's not true.
That's European. That's European slavery. That's not African slavery.
True. Yeah, that's
because African
slavery.
No, listen. Africans rose. Africans rose to the throne. Yeah. From being a so-called slave. Yeah, that's European slavery.
Yeah, and I just told you, people who are seen as so-called slaves right now, 2020, are married into the so-called slaves family and married members of that so-called family. I'm telling you that right now, not something that I read or heard, something that I read, something that I know. That
any person that was born of African descent in America has that same connection to Africa. But at the same time, a lot of these brothers have come from broken families, complete broken, lost history of their families. Some of these people never even met their great grandmothers before.
Right.
Some people don't even know who their grandmother or
So,
their real mothers are.
so brother
And
David,
so the system was designed to only way you can break a slave or break a child or break a soul or break a mind
yeah,
is to completely keep it in isolation and let it think for itself.
great point.
So this and this comes from life experience that
Mhm.
I've learned over living over the years of life. And I come from a descendant. I am a third generational descendant of slavery. My great grandmother, I come from the South. I'm from Mississippi,
Hmm.
and I got a chance to meet my great grandmother,
Hmm.
and I had a chance to actually get a taste, or how do you say, get a taste of my real history of my life, and and how do you say, where we come from.
Uh-huh.
And we did come from Africa, and to a certain degree, like you said, our family was broken by the language. Once we lost our language amongst the how do you say, the family, then that was already one stage of breaking or bucking,
Okay,
the
brother
black
David, let me
man
say
out of
this.
his mind and system, and how do you say, integrating into the system of America the way they
Right.
want them to be.
Yeah.
See, it's a certain, see, when they say African American, they have that in their mind. There's a certain, how do you say, that slave nigga, or that how do you say, that field nigga,
Hmm.
is that African American image
Hmm.
to the average, how do you say, Caucasian American in America.
Okay, brother
You know what
David,
I'm saying?
that's a great point. I think now let's build off of what you just said. So, personally, like you said, a lot of people don't even know who their great grandparent is. So that's on a personal level. Collectively, if we looked at collectively what the European attempted to do, and I think he failed. Actually, I think there's more connection than what we believe or what we know. And when you go to Africa, like we've been in Africa, and you speak with the people, you start seeing those traditions that you notice that, oh, I thought that's strictly straight from the South. You say, oh, no, that actually came from the land. That came from the people. So that respect for elders, respect for your family members, the spirituality, the deep connection with the afterlife. You start realizing, okay, so they didn't really break us like I thought they did. So, but that was a great point when you said that a lot of people don't know who the great grandparent is. So therefore, it causes them to have this delusional identity in terms of
Right,
who they
right,
are. They buy the term nigga instead of buying the terms of no, you're royalty, you're African.
right,
So this is
right,
what we'll be addressing:
right.
is how did the European, and what ways did the European still to this day plays in terms of breaking us apart. And a lot of it now you find coming from our own community when it comes to understanding Africa. We still have the same mentality that that this European put into us
Right,
in
right,
our time of so-called slavery, and that is one of degrading Africa and
right.
trying to break from Africa.
And
What you'll find,
stigmatizing.
how much you say, but
Mhm.
what you'll find is our strength is going to come when we reconnect to our power base. And I'm gonna speak more
All
on that.
people do that. All people are connected to land base. And like we said, in future shows, we're definitely going to address the identity question, because that is the question that has us floating about in society, attaching to all of these subculture and subgroups, because we have not identified ourselves with Africa because of the stigmatization and the negativity and the propaganda that has gone to get us to hate Africa. I mean, we can't deny Tarzan syndrome is still alive in
Still
2020.
alive. Yeah.
We cannot deny that when they show the areas that are the most poverty stricken in Africa, don't show you the other areas of Africa, the beautiful areas that we visit. They don't want you to go there. So last year that Ghana had a welcoming year of return. We were there before that. There's a lot of opportunity to connect back with our family.
Yeah.
And he touched also on the broken family,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
which is key, because you can't go against your family, your parent. You can't connect. You can't have a context of your proper role and how you function. The culture and the nation is the springboard for you. That's what we fall back on. That's what you were referring to when you said the Japanese child can see the samurai
Right.
and
Mhm.
get pride,
Right.
or the geisha girl, or
Mhm.
or whoever, and see some tradition,
Mhm.
some honor, some symbolism in the custom, in the
Mhm.
dance,
Mhm.
just like the foods and just like the dress.
Right.
The pride that comes with that. And then we are ones who meander about trying to attach to someone else's identity, someone else's culture, because ours has been used. And when they talk about the melting pot, our culture was used as the fire for the pot. So
exactly. I want to piggyback on that and say this is a critical. I'm glad Brother David brought it up, because it's great. It speaks right to our point to who controls the present controls the past. And that controlling of the past will control the future. Now, right now, as we speak, there's a big scramble for Africa. There's a huge scramble for Africa. As a matter of fact, they're saying this next century is going to be Africa's century because they have more children are being born in Nigeria than all of Europe combined.
That's right.
70% of your doctors in America are actually African born. My son graduated from Howard University, and the med students, 50% of the medical students at Howard were Nigerian born. So we have to hook into that. And why is that important? Because if you look at Los Angeles and you drive around Los Angeles, you look at Koreatown, you look at Chinatown, you look at the Japanese, one central thing they all have is a bank that is tied into their base country. So we're not just saying this just for this love of Africa, although I have that, and a romanticism of Africa, although I proudly do that. We're saying it because it has practical implications for our children. And that is the next time we try to go get a bank, instead of going to Wells Fargo, where they call us mud people and give us subprime loans, we need to step into an African bank, which African brother from Ghana just saved a bank in Chicago, one of the oldest black banks in Chicago. An African millionaire in Ghana came to America, saved that bank, and what he said, I'm buying this so I can provide loans for my people, for black people. And if you look at just what happened, we're kind of jumping ahead of ourselves, I know, but with George and in Africa, what happened in terms of all the support they've showed for George Floyd. And it's the first time since really the 60s. And it was really Malcolm X's dream. You see that George Floyd touched the African continent. They were picketing and boycotting American embassies in Africa based upon what happened to us here. Why is that important? Because there was a Korean guy in a plane he was discriminated on a plane. He was Korean, and China asked America, what's up with that?
That's right.
The Pan-Asian community came together and said, why did you do that? Right. This is what Marcus Garvey meant when he said that, if you have a power base, you are protected around the world,
abroad. And see that is one of the major topics that we will be discussing, because we realize what Brother Malcolm was doing by taking our domestic issues international.
Right.
It was necessary, and that is the solution. We are, regardless of what people wish to be, regardless of what people pretend to be, we are an independent nation inside of a nation.
Right.
That is our status. Our status could not change by being forced into so-called citizenry by the stroke of a pen.
Right.
That hasn't changed the power dynamic. That has not changed the ownership. No. It has not changed the economics. No. It has not halted the assault on our families. Mm-hmm. It has not improved our health care. Mm-hmm. It has done none of those things, because we must do those things as a nation. And so to call upon our international brothers and sisters, our long lost family ties, is very promising to see that, as Sundiatta alluded to, the first time that this has happened since 1964, when the African Union at that time, the OAU, asked about the United States wanting to intervene in the Congo regarding some nuns who were supposedly under attack. Well, the Congolese ambassador said, well, if you have the right to request intervention in the Congo, well, why don't we have the right to request intervention in Mississippi and Alabama, where our people are being harmed by your people? And so this time is the first time since then that the African Union now spoke on their platform against the killing of George Floyd. So it's more than just a continuation of the abuse, This is an international implication, and this is why you're seeing this scrambling now. This is why you're seeing the changes of bills, and all of a sudden they want to take down the Confederate flag and talk about renaming bases and all of this other stuff because it's an economic issue. Don't ever forget that. An international. It has economic consequences because they cannot go internationally and present themselves as the beacons of democracy and the custodians of fair play and of human rights when they're abusing us in this country. So this is what this is about.
And and especially I should say in Africa, where you have a scramble for the resources. So when America's trying to go there and set up trade, Africans can say, well, how are you treating our people on your land? And that's what they're doing. And when we look at education and we look at our identity, I'm glad Brother David brought this up, because this is one of our key issues, our key point. And that is, when you look at the problems that we have here in America, you have to start looking at how did we get to this, and all there are alternatives right now that exist that show us that this is not the norm. And what I mean by that is, when you look at education, and you can go to any black child and you ask them who's smart in math and science, and they'll tell you Asian or white. I'm sorry, that's the truth. And children speak the truth. Black adults, we started hedging because we know it's not politically correct. But children will tell you, yeah, Asians and whites lead the world in mathematics. But in actuality, the smartest family, you Google the smartest family in England is a black family, is a Nigerian family, is a black family. As a matter of fact, it's the Africans who lead the test scores in Europe. Now, why is that important? Because since we know we came from this base, and we know that they're extremely successful academically around the world, what influences are stopping us from fulfilling our inherent abilities as we see it in other places in the world?
That's right.
So this is very important. This is why we're looking at these places, and this is why we look internationally, because you just can't look at America and say, okay, black children aren't doing well here. It must be something about us. We must be inferior. We must be cursed, which I've heard black people say. And there's another thing we're going to be talking about. It's going to be, we're going to have some uncomfortable conversations.
That's right.
But we're going to talk about the self-hatred that we have for ourselves. We're going to really talk about how we really believe some of this stuff. We really believe some of this stuff that this white man has taught us since we've been in America. We really have.
And Amos Wilson said, when you're filled with self-hate, your mind works in reverse, meaning that you love the things that are destroying you,
like the Republican Party,
and you hate the things that would support your growth and your ascension,
like your African self.
Exactly. So those are the realities, man. And I appreciate that, to the fullest, because bringing it home to domestic issues here, we can make this connection, because we're talking internationally, but it's a macro and a micro, and the micro relates to the macro. The macro is the international scene. The micro is, how does this manifest in your life, in your home, in your neighborhood, and in your empowerment or disempowerment? And we have to talk reality here. And the question is, what is our power position? We spoke of Amos' blueprint for Black Power. What is our blueprint? And Dr. Bobby Wright, you guys going to learn about them.
Very important.
He said, we have to have a Black social theory, and I don't think we do. I don't hear no collection of leaders presently that can tell us that. We don't have an agenda. We don't have a demand. We are not producing. If we're economically, we're not. What are we producing outside of entertainment and sports? And those are making money for billionaires and other people. They forbid them from formulating their own league, and being owners in that sense of their own entity.
Let me touch on that just briefly, because we're going to get to it further, because it's a great point. And that's when you hear Jackie Robinson, we always tell the story. We always tell the story about integration of baseball. And so we're always always given historically and in classroom the story that the integration of baseball had to do with the benevolence of the Dodgers, how much they just loved
Branch Rickey.
Branch Rickey
good
just
old
had
Branch.
this good old Branch, just had this open heart and said, look, let's do the right thing and let these people come in because it's only the right thing to do. They always paint that picture. And so, but really the reality is something totally different. The integration of baseball was an economic move. It was a chess move.
That's right.
And what they did was they said, we are going to break an industry that is being run by Black people. At the height of the Major League Baseball, they drew 50,000 people at their All-Star game.
That's right.
At the height of the Negro League All-Star game, they drew 50,000 people. They were having to compete with a brand of baseball, which was much more exciting than their brand. We played small ball. We had
hit and run, all of those things.
Cool Papa Bell,
sacrifice, all of those type of plays that you see in
Josh
modern baseball.
Gibson, all of these great
Satchel
players.
Paige.
Satchel Paige, who went on to the Major League Baseball his first year. He was
47.
He was 47 years old and was named Rookie of the Year. And they asked him, "How does it feel to be the best player in baseball?" He said, "Which year?" And so so I mean, we had all these dynamic things that's going on, challenging their league. So what they came up with, let's take one player, that is Jack Robinson, and put him into Major League Baseball. And when they did that, collectively, we as a group left our industry and went over to watch the one Black player playing in the white league. And now if you look at Major League Baseball, you have very few Black players in Major League Baseball. You had a whole industry back then.
It's under 8%.
It's under 8%
that came from that come from the United States.
From the United States. As a matter of fact, we have HBCUs, Black colleges. Their Black baseball teams are made up of non-Black people. That's how few baseball players we are now producing. So it was a great move on behalf of the dominant society, but it was a greater move for them to paint it as though it was actually doing us a favor, when in reality it was harming us when it comes financially.
Let me go another way with that, Sundiatta. Baseball is a game that fathers teach their sons to play.
Exactly.
And society wise, the systematic removal of the father from the home.
That's right.
Contributed to the decline in the baseball players that we were producing. If you look at if you go back, we're probably jumping ahead, but I'm gonna do it anyway. If we go back to the slave model, the family was under attack. The father had no jurisdiction over his children, or whether he could even remain. The master could take him, move him, sell him, do whatever else, or his children or his wife. So when that moved forward, the same dynamics were socially engineered, so that he could not provide for the family. He'd leave the house. It's the same dynamic, though, right? So if you move further, when they came with these quote unquote social programs, welfare and other programs, so you could get it if the father wasn't there.
Right, exactly.
You benefited if the father wasn't there. But then they turn around and give statistics now about single mothers household, the percentage of single mother household in Black families, which was engineered.
Yes.
Right. And use that as a cause for poor education scores, our rates in academic programs, our criminal justice incidents, so-called delinquencies, and all these other things. These things are engineered, and they create the program, and it still sticks with the basis, which is why it's so important that you know history, because you can see it and recognize this pattern, saying, wait a minute, we've seen this before.
Exactly, yeah. And then we can come up with solutions that alter or counter that, because many times, repeatedly in the history of America, laws are passed to harm us, and even those that appear to help us were actually actually end up hurting us. And you can take a look at, from the New Deal policies to the even integration itself. You look at Brown versus Board of Education, which we'll be talking further about. Brown versus the Board of Education, that supposedly integrated school and destroyed all those Black schools that have Black principals, which goes back to what you were saying. The leadership shows a Black male in leadership and Black female in leadership. We lost $240 million in 1 year of income back in the 1950s. So these are the kind of things that we have to look at and be honest, because if we're going to look at our problem, If we look at our problem, if we're not honest, we're going to blame ourselves, because there's nothing we're not going to do. We're not going to start pointing the finger and say, oh, it's your fault. It's his fault. It's your fault. I hate him, or these people. This is how we are. And you hear a lot about that with this generation. You hear a lot of black children who have anti-black attitudes because they look at the current reality and don't understand how it got to be that. So we're going to be controversial.
Yes, because it goes back to some of the questions that Malcolm X posed. Who taught you to hate yourself?
Who taught you to hate yourself?
And we can't act, it sounds appalling that you look in the mirror and you say, well, I don't hate myself, but what do your actions do? You may not self mutilate yourself, but do you mutilate your brother? Or do you abuse your woman? Or do you
neglect your children?
Yeah, neglect your children, or not take care of your children. This is from a man's standpoint. So if you do that, how is that not manifesting self-hate?
Right.
If you can't invest in your future because you feel powerless, and if you do feel powerless, what are you doing to create a power base?
Right.
Are you simply just giving our money? If we talk about economics, how quickly our dollars go, we pay for our own oppression. Basically, that's what we do.
Yeah.
We give our money away to people who do not who send their children to college or open up a business in our neighborhood. Why is that? You will be starving if you try to open up a business in Koreatown or Chinatown or any other town like that. But everybody can open a business in your neighborhood. Right. And we know that, but we can't be content with saying the unfavorable loan practices. We should loan ourselves money. Exactly. That's what we're talking about. Banks and things that we can do with our consumption spending alone. We spend almost $5 trillion annually. So we have no excuse.
And who said that originally? I mean, who said that in the 60s that most people don't know who said that? Martin Luther King.
Oh yeah, Martin Luther King.
April 3rd, 1968.
The day before he got assassinated.
Then we're gonna touch on just a little bit, touching that, because these are kind of things we're gonna talk about. Things that you have been taught and do not realize. And it's a perfect example. It's a great analogy. So Dr. King, who actually, to tell you, could only speak in 4 churches in Memphis. The black community had turned their back on Martin Luther King. The churches thought he was too radical. As a matter of fact, he was rejected by the NAACP because they thought he was rejected earlier. But in April 3rd, 1968, at the Mason Temple in Memphis, at the Masonic Temple in Memphis, Martin Luther King, they always played a speech. And this is a great analogy of what they do to us. They played a speech of Martin Luther King halfway through, 2/3 through his speech, when he starts saying,
I've been to the mountaintop.
I've been to the mountaintop. I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its rewards. But I want to let you know that I've been to the mountaintop and I've seen that, and we as a people will get to the mountaintop. They always play that part, which is a great ending, but they never, in the same speech, this is how bold they are. In the same speech, they never rewinded and played the beginning. And that's because in the beginning, one thing they were able to do with Martin Luther King was they were able to take Martin Luther King and use them against black power or black interests. If you ask children about black power and being proud to be black, they'll tell you, well, Dr. King told us don't look at race. He told us we're not supposed to be, looking at race and do racial politics, stuff like that. Well, this speech right before he dies, he spells out how we're supposed to move as a black people.
That's right.
And he mentions just what Brother Tehuti says, and that is that we have a spending power that would make us the 11th
at the time,
about the 12th richest nation on earth. He said we should move as a group of people.
That's right.
And what whites were able to do was dumb you down in terms of who Martin Luther King was, and get you not to move on the racial politics.
Which is why they moved on him. And he talked about having bank ends, insurance ends.
Yeah.
He said you don't buy Coca-Cola.
Yes.
He talked about
as black people he used to be
collectively, and using your money wisely, spending your money with your own people and create that economic base to produce your own jobs, produce your own industries. And that was threatening.
And that was black nationalism
back then.
Because we always talk about Malcolm moving closer to Martin, which we're going to talk about that in detail because we have information on that. But we never talk about Dr. King moving more closer to a black national framework.
That's right.
Because when he realized, okay, wait a minute, this push for integration is not enough for my people. I mean, what good is it to say you can go eat at a restaurant and you can't afford to eat at that restaurant? And also, he pointed out back then about this political class, and that's what we're gonna touch. We're gonna step on some toes when we talk about this, but we're gonna have to talk about it. This political class of people. Just like you have an educational class of teachers, just like you have a automotive class of mechanics, you have a political class of people who've made their money in the political realm, being the go-between the power white structure and the poor black group.
That's right.
And they've made their money, and not so much to change the dynamics of making that poor group richer, but just basically keeping themselves in that position to get wealthier and wealthier. Dr. King spoke about that with Hosea Williams. Speak on that.
Right. And he also talked about the preachers being more concerned with their the size of their wheelbases than the people or their congregations. He talked about many things. People have the misconception that it was a mass appeal that Dr. King had. He had a few people that was really solid in his organization. It was many problems. Just like he said, the NAACP said all he did was get locked up in jail, and they had to spend their funds to get him out of jail. So there was a lot of tension within that movement that we don't speak about, because it's just silent, like the show says, don't talk politics. It's a silence, but it's a silence that's granting consent to our oppression.
Right.
So we cannot be silent about what has taken place, the mistakes that we have made. No one is perfect,
right?
But we need to acknowledge that, learn from that, and then build a real organization and a real coalition.
Right. That's right. You're absolutely right.
And just think about it.
Right. And do we have any comments? We want to just entertain our group of people.
What's the name of that speech? Ebony Hall is asking, what's the name of that speech?
I believe they called the Mountaintop speech.
Yeah,
but it was
given
April 3rd.
Yeah, 1968.
April 3rd, 1968.
You can look it up on you should be able to look it up on YouTube, but it's about 40 minutes in length. The speech that they normally play is only the last little segment, of that speech. And also in that speech, he also makes one of my favorite quotes by him that they never say. He says in that speech, we have to stand up. He says, a man cannot ride your back unless it is bent. And as a people, we must stand up, because that's what his lesson was. And he also talked about the dangers of the white liberal. He speaks about that extensively. But we have so many. We can't let others define our heroes, our experience, and our icons, and the lessons that they have taught us, because they shy away from the king that spoke against the war. Beyond Vietnam, that's another speech. 1967, April 4th. I believe it was April 4th. So
and that speech was very important. Because sometimes we say things like, oh yeah, when he started speaking of Vietnam, that's when he really was on the other side. And that's true. But why was that? Because Johnson's wife was making money off the helicopters that were being brought down in Vietnam. When they told Johnson, why don't you end the war? He said, my friends are making too much money. And when you talk about who were his friends, we have to bring up a man by the name of H.L. Hunt. H.L. Hunt was the man who put fear in the Nation of Islam, because according to Malcolm, H.L. Hunt was the one funding it. Who was H.L. Hunt? Well, they asked J. Paul Getty here in California, how does it feel to be the richest man in the world? He said, no. To answer that question, you must ask a man named H.L. Hunt. H.L. Hunt's son is the reason why you call the Super Bowl the Super Bowl. That's right. Because he bought into the Kansas City Chiefs and the Chicago Bulls. So when you start looking at how it's all interrelated.
Also, he did a run on silver in an attempt to take over the currency, and start their own currency.
And he was a major investor in the Vietnam War. The elite economic group that had invested majorly in the Vietnam War hated John F. Kennedy. They feared he was going to pull them out, and plus he was going to pull their tax credit for oil, because war is a big oil producing machine. Or you need a lot of oil. First, the areas you're conquering, you can obtain oil, and plus you need a lot of oil to make an army go. So when you looked at John F. Kennedy, who came from the Eastern establishment, mainly bankers and other things, like his father was a gun runner,
bootlegger.
bootlegger and mainly a banker. He
Mm-hmm.
was a threat to that Southwest Texas and all that oil producing country. That's why H.L. Hunt had him assassinated.
That's
we
right.
believe,
That's right.
allegedly, and this is something we believe in Dallas at that time. If you look at the movie JFK and those pictures that said wanted for treason, it's been said that the Hunt family put those flyers up. And recently his lawyer has come out and said some things toward that. But anyway, we say that to say that why did that speech at Riverside Church in New York in 1967 with Stokely Carmichael, later Kwame Ture, sitting in the front, and him saying that this Vietnam War is taken away from efforts to feed our people here in America? Why was that war put Dr. Martin Luther King on the outside of America's love interest with him? Because before that, they had no problem with him saying integrate the South so blacks could come and spend money at Woolworth's.
Redistribute that money
and redistribute that wealth, and we're going to get into all of that, and we're going to talk about his failures in Chicago and how that machine in Chicago and Cicero, how that machine in Chicago that would later kill Fred Hampton, how he saw it and he said this is worse than the South, and then he realized that Northern racism, which affects us out here in this Western racism and this Western segregation that we face now, they're trying to sweep us off the land. So all of that we're going to talk. We're going to talk about all of that. That's why, and we're going to give you nothing but facts, and we're going to give you nothing but books to look up. Because we got to be knowledgeable. I'm sorry, go ahead, brother.
And the real question is we have to be more than surface in where our actual place is, because you have, I call it educational apartheid. If it's not by tracking, it's by the resources. If it's not by that, they find another avenue by this privatizing of public education. DeVos, Betsy DeVos, that's going on in Inglewood right now. You have Eli Bro of KB Homes. The last two superintendents prior to this county administrator went through his superintendent unaccredited training academy, which has a basically a playbook on how to take down a public school district. So these things are at play, and we have the history behind it because it's nothing new. You had Rockefeller involved in that, Carnegie involved in it, all of these Robert Barons
University,
right, the Tuskegee machine. That's what it's called. Where with Booker T. Washington and the Rosenthal Fund, who was an executive with Sears and Roebuck, and so we're going to talk about all of that. And in the excellent book, while we go to break, you should look is The Education of Blacks in the South by Anderson from 1866 to 1930, I believe. So look at that book, and then we'll come right back to you.
Take a break. Yep.
All right. Hey, okay, so that's our first show. We hope we whet your appetite for a lot of the information that we're going to be bringing forth. And we just like to thank everybody for tuning in. Make sure you subscribe to the We Are LA channel. If you haven't, please click subscribe. We'll be here next Thursday at 4, and we'll tackle the next topic. And Sundiatta, I just want to thank you and thank the listening audience and the viewing audience. And we're going to get really into this because they say don't talk politics, but we got to tell truth.
Read up. We'll see you next time.
All right.